Hello again, everybody. Bob Kaylor here with the Good News Magazine podcast. We're doing some interviews and views as we move toward General Conference coming up here at the end of February. And today my guest is Reverend Beth Ann Cook, who is pastor of Logansport First United Methodist Church in the Indiana Conference. She's an elder, and she's also a member of the Commission on General Conference. So she has been involved in meetings, planning the agenda for General Conference. And Beth Ann, I'm so glad you're able to join us today. And the big question I think on everybody's mind is, how are we going to get all of this done in 3 days? How is it going to happen? Can you kind of walk us through the process and how the agenda came together and what you all came up with?
It is good to be with you, and I will be glad to try to answer that question. All of us on the Commission on General Conference had those concerns ourselves. It is a very short amount of time, and we have a lot to get done. I am cautiously optimistic that this is going to go better than people think it will.
Wow.
And I really am.
We don't get too much optimism these days around this stuff, so that's good.
Everywhere I go, I have this conversation with people, and they say, this can't work. And I keep saying, I really think God is in this, and I think it's going to be okay. The first thing I want to tell you is that the Commission on General Conference is an incredibly diverse group. We have got people from all of the areas of United Methodism, and we have got people from all areas on the theological spectrum. And the amazing thing is that the process we came up with was voted unanimously for us, by all of us, to support it.
Wow.
And if you had told me that there was anything that this group would unanimously support, I'd have been surprised. And yet when it came down to it, and I really felt like the Holy Spirit was in the room, and I found myself really sensing that God was giving us a way to do this that will be not just fair and transparent, but perceived as fair by people who are in different places. So I'm pretty optimistic about that.
It sounds almost miraculous at this point.
I really think it was. And a lot of discussion by us, by the Commission on General Conference members, by the Commission on Way Forward, by the Council of Bishops, everybody hashing out, how can we really do this well? And what was decided is that we need to prioritize the legislation in a way that will help the body work through it. And so we have really nice voting devices that are going to help with some of the issues, not have some of the technology issues we'd had. We will prioritize all of these petitions and groupings. So like everything from the One Church plan will be together, everything from the traditional plan will be together, everything from the simple plan will be together, all the ones that are multi-part. And then the standalone petitions that were submitted that were determined to be in harmony will also be in there. And all of the delegates will press 1 for high priority if they think this is something we should really spend time perfecting, and press 2 if they think it's low priority. And what that will do is allow us to sort that. Then we will go into the legislative group, which is going to have everybody in it. Instead of dividing people out into different legislative groups, we decided it was better to keep everybody together, because legislative groups are not always representative of the whole of General Conference. And something could have been voted down in one legislative group and then not even come to the floor. And everybody would have felt like they didn't have a chance to work on it. And so by having it all in one legislative group, we'll go through it by the order of prioritization. So whatever has the highest percentage of votes, that's where we'll start. And so we'll really kind of get a feel for the will of the House at the very beginning, and then we'll work through the process.
So it's kind of like taking a straw poll before everything really gets going.
It is, and that will be one of the very first things that we do.
So when you're looking at all those petitions and the order that they get presented for the straw poll, is there a kind of a randomness to that, or is it set in a particular way?
It is set in a particular way, and I think it is by the order they are in the ADCA with their page numbers, so that people will be able to follow them.
Okay.
And the page numbers will be projected. And here's the thing that I really like. We're going to go through and prioritize all of these, but instead of doing the first bundle or the first petition and then seeing the results of that, we will go through all of them and then see the results on all of them. So people can't play games or try to influence it by watching for how things come back on results.
And I think I read there are 78 petitions. Is that correct?
I am not sure off the top of my head, Bob. I haven't looked at it today, and I can't remember.
There's probably 1,000 numbers going on in your head at this point with all the stuff going on.
So, and believe it or not, this is not my primary ministry focus. Logansport first is.
I'm shocked. It seems like it's everybody's priority right now. It seems to hang over us sort of like a cloud. But it's exciting to hear that there's a real process that everybody can kind of agree on. Because I remember in 2012, I was a reserve delegate, and we spent 3 days voting on the rules. So I love the fact that we could kind of launch into that. Maybe that's a model for future general conferences as well.
Well, the reason we don't have to vote on the rules this time is we're still operating by the rules that we had in Portland. This is a continuation, in essence, of the 2016 General Conference. So the rules that we passed in 2016 continue.
So we have these petitions presented in bundles, and then we have those that are kind of individual. I know that one of the questions will be about exit paths. There was some discussion out there about being able to vote on an exit path before we vote on anything else. It sounds to me like it just depends on whether that's a high priority or low priority.
If the will of the body is to make that a high priority to vote on that first, it can happen. I have lots of friends in West Ohio. Being here in Indiana, they're our neighboring conference. And I know that they would like to see a gracious exit voted on before we do anything else. The idea is that it helps us not look at it who's winner and who's loser, if you want to use that language, but instead to say, how do we want to treat each other and how do we love each other as Jesus calls us to?
When I look at the agenda in the ADCA, which, by the way, you can find online through umc.org, and we'll try to post the link in the podcast notes here so that folks can pull that up. It's a little bit of light reading before General Conference, but you can read all of the petition.
The last ADCA it is.
Yeah, compared to the last one.
3 inches thick. It's half an inch thick.
Yeah. So, but it's fully there in the PDF. And I noticed that Saturday, February 23rd, is a full day of prayer and preparation. And it says detailed scheduled to be announced. Can you give us any kind of flavor for what that Saturday will look like?
I can tell you that there has been a schedule that's been put out by the Council of Bishops. They're in charge of planning that. And I did see one on that, but it has times of worship led by different leaders from different areas of the church. So there are Central Conference leaders and U.S. leaders, that kind of thing. But I don't know any real details on what that day of prayer is going to look like.
And the rest of the agenda looks very stripped down. You don't have the normal what I call a dog and pony show that you normally have at General Conference. Of course, we're in much shorter time frame. So
it was intentional. It was the decision of the program subcommittee that we have on the Commission on General Conference. I don't serve on that, but I really appreciate what they did, that we don't need to spend time on a lot of announcements and videos and all of that. We need to focus on the business that we've come to work on. And we need to have the maximum flexibility to do that. And so that's what they have built into the schedule. There's been a lot of people talk about how, well, the first day is going to be the day that we pick what we're going to work on. And then the next day we're going to do this. And then the next day we're going to do that. That's a bit misleading. The reality is that if we get done with the prioritization and we elect the officers for the legislative group, the one legislative group, then we can keep going and fill all the time we have. And so it maximizes the time that we have.
Is there a sort of and you'll have to catch me up on the rules. Believe it or not, I did not dive deep into that in 2016 looking at that.
I haven't looked at those today either.
But in terms of, thinking about all these petitions and the amount of debate that normally takes place, I would assume there's a limit on the amount of debate that's taking place on each one of these as they come forward.
Well, there are a limit on lengths of speeches whenever somebody makes a proposal for an amendment and the 3 for and the 3 against. The wild card there is how many amendments people, make before somebody says, call the question. And it's usually that one guy from, I think, down south somewhere who that's his job at General Conference is to say, call the question. And everybody knows exactly who he is when he does it.
Would it be safe to say, in your opinion, that whatever we see in the plans that have been presented, and there are at least 3 major plans, there are a lot of other little plans that are out there and others that have been proposed, that nothing that we've seen thus far is probably going to emerge as it currently stands?
I don't have historical documentation on this, but I suspect nothing has ever gotten out of General Conference without some amendment to it.
Yeah, I would suspect there's going to be a lot of that. And it's interesting. I think there's a sense of urgency as I look at the agenda as well, because things start at 8:00 in the morning with opening worship, and then adjournment is at 6:30 p.m. So you don't have those late night sessions, at least not in the plenary. There'll be lots of caucusing, I'm sure, after that, but it seems really tight in that respect.
It is tight, but I was surprised whenever the subcommittee brought us the number of hours of actual working on stuff and how much they had taken out by doing all of the different things that we do during General Conference to recognize things, and the videos and all of those kind of special programming bits having been pulled out. We're actually getting a lot more contact hours, if you will, than you would expect in 3 days of General Conference. So it's almost like having a longer conference by pulling all of that out. Interesting.
So the other thing that I have been telling people is that General Conference is going to be live streamed. And unlike previous years when it goes on for, 10 days or it feels like 10 months, it goes on and on and on, and it's not really scintillating television.
It may feel like 10 months.
Yeah. I've told them, you can watch this, and I'm wondering if there's like a viewer guide. What should we watch for when we're looking at General Conference? This is the opportunity for you to put on your Tony Romo hat. I gave Tom Lambrecht the opportunity last week to kind of say, what should we look for? What should people be looking for?
I wasn't always churched, and I'll confess that I'm sitting here thinking of drinking games, but that's probably not what you have in mind.
I've seen that proposed on several social media sites. So
you can choose to edit that out or not as you feel best. I think that what people will want to watch for early on when we do that prioritization, what comes up to the top of the prioritization, because you're looking at voting strength of how many people are supporting what plans at some level. People who maybe they could live with one plan, they may mark that as high priority as well. But for the most part, this is going to be what people support. And so that's going to tell you a lot about the will of the body. Whether or not we get a gracious exit that comes up in one of those as an early strong piece of legislation that people want to deal with will tell us something.
Mm-hmm. So we're looking at each of these plans that will be kind of voted on as a package to some degree. So we'll kind of have an early indication of which one of them kind of is getting more traction than the others. Or they might all have the same amount of traction.
I will understand how much strength there is and what the divide of the House is looking like a little bit. I think if I were going to try for the drinking game, I would probably go with the word contextualization, although that might put somebody in the hospital.
I always think of the Inigo Montoya thing when we talk about this stuff. Yeah. And, you keep using that word. I do not think it means what you think it means. That happens quite a lot at General Conference.
Yeah. Maybe instead of the drinking game, maybe it'll be a chocolate eating game, because in my delegation meeting the other day, they said if something goes the way you don't want it to be, what would you hope for from people? And I said, just hand me chocolate. Nobody gets hurt. So that was my joke in delegation.
So go ahead. Please.
I think that some of the things you might want to look for also are there places where people are seeking to try to acknowledge that our system is broken. In the past at General Conference, going back many years, there's been a time whenever people have acknowledged the pain and the fact that there's not a way to really fix all of this, and have suggested some things like a gracious exit or an amicable separation, that people have pulled back from that. I remember one General Conference where literally at the close at midnight, we're all standing around singing "Blessed Be the Tie That Binds." And I remember thinking, this doesn't feel true. So if there is an acknowledgement of the pain and of a desire that in spite of our brokenness to try to really be realistic and deal with it versus shove it under a rug, I think that may be an encouraging sign.
Yeah. I mean, in past General Conferences, the other thing that's always been a factor has been, interruption in the midst of General Conference, and I guess there's a different way of dealing with that with this General Conference. It's in a stadium. I mean, it's where the Rams used to play. Yeah,
it is where the Rams used to play. We are, instead of being where you can just walk up to the bar where everybody, by bar, I mean the voting bar, where if you're inside of that, you're supposed to be a delegate.
Not the bar for drinking games.
Not the bar for the drinking games. Boy, this interview did not go the way I thought it would. People are learning way too much about me. But in Portland, you could just walk up to that, and there were a few security people standing around, but there was no barrier of any kind. When we're in St. Louis, we will be down on the floor where the playing field was at, and you can't as easily walk up to it, which may be somewhat helpful. I have been told by people that I don't agree with theologically that they're not planning the degree of protest that we have seen in the past, but I have limited ability to trust that because every General Conference I've been at has had significant protests and disruption.
I think we kind of expect it at this point. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot at stake in this particular General Conference, and emotions and tensions are likely to be high in many different ways, no matter what side of things you find yourself on.
And I think that's really important for us to acknowledge that everyone is hurting, everyone is grieving, everyone is anxious and worried. It's not something that anyone is going into thinking, oh boy, I got to go to St. Louis and be there for this. It's more of a, Lord, we want to do what you want us to do. Help us know what to do kind of sober moment.
Yes. And so we've been encouraging people to be in prayer. I know that Africa Initiative has invited us to a time of prayer and fasting, and many different groups across the church have done so. And people ask me all the time, what should we do? And I said, the number one thing you can do is pray. The second thing you can do is talk to your delegation, give them your concerns, and that'll be important to do.
And one thing that we have done is taken that ADCA that you're giving the link to. It includes the list of all the names of the delegates and the reserve delegates. Mm-hmm. And we actually have handed that out to people and asked them to pray by name for delegates.
Wonderful.
And I remember going on a 3-day weekend experience similar to Walk to Emmaus, and how blessed I was that there were people I didn't even know that were praying for me. And I think there's power in praying for people by name. And not just praying, God, go get them and make them do what I want them to do. But praying, God, would you bless this person with wisdom? Would you meet all their needs? Would you help them deal with the stress and the anxiety of this situation? Would you bless their family and their churches back home? All of those kinds of pieces. And really praying for God's will to be seen and for us to really love one another, even though we disagree. I think that's a big piece.
That's wonderful. Yeah. I asked Tom another question too in the last episode. So as a clergy member of the United Methodist Church, we're fellow clergy. Put on your prognosticator cap. What kind of things do you think might happen?
At General Conference or as a result of General Conference?
Both.
I think there's a good chance that General Conference actually comes out with a decision. I know a lot of people are saying that there's no way anything will get done, but I actually think there will be some sort of a decision. And I could be wrong about that, but that's my best guess. I think you will see a lot of people taking this very seriously, and a lot of people who have studied really well and understand all the dynamics. They're aware of the challenges. I actually talked with Rebecca Miles the other day, and she and I don't agree on all of these issues, but we both were talking about the implications and the sense that this is a kairos moment for our church. And I think there will be people there who are aware of that. I think that there will be disagreement because there are people who are very emotional about this, and it will be hard. I also think that the secular media will be there and they won't understand all of our theological nuances, and that whatever picture that they paint is not going to be 100% accurate. I think those are some things that will happen. After General Conference, and again, this is me being optimistic, but I feel optimistic about this. I think there is the potential for us to actually move forward and for us to stop being stuck in this Groundhog Day-like experience, General Conference after General Conference after General Conference, of being so focused on this one issue and this one decision about how we will be in ministry with LGBTQ persons, that we don't focus on anything else. And I went out of my way to tell my congregation that it's not about whether or not we're going to love LGBTQ persons or have them in our church. And we all agree on that. It's about how we'll be in ministry. It's about whether we will affirm ordination for people who are married to the same gender or sexually active outside of marriage, and whether or not we will have marriage of same-gender couples in our churches. That's the question. And if we can deal with this, and even if it comes down to recognizing that we can't come to a decision altogether and live with it, it may give us an opportunity that a traditionalist branch off of the church and an affirming branch off of the church can focus on doing ministry in a new way and see some revitalization.
I think in the end of the day, that's what most people would like to see, something like that where we can bless one another on the way. I've often said, and I borrowed it from someone else, but it's kind of like a Paul and Barnabas moment in many ways. Yeah. Where you part ways for the sake of the ministry and to follow the vision as you feel God is leading you to do.
Well, and the other thing that I would say is going to happen after General Conference is that my more theologically progressive friends and I are still going to be friends. This doesn't mean that we're going to stop having a relationship. It doesn't mean that we're never going to do any kind of mission or ministry together again. There are people I disagree with on these kinds of matters, but we are also, we care about some of the same ministry with the poor and doing some of the same things. And we're still going to be involved in Habitat together. We're still going to care about helping people who are hungry together. And we might even do it better on the other side of this if we resolve this and stop sniping at each other over it.
Well, we'll keep praying for General Conference. So we want to thank you for all of your work and the work of the commission, which was no small task, I'm sure. And
we have wonderful people that I'm lucky to be part of that group with.
Great. And be praying and be connected. Stay tuned. We'll have another episode of the Good News Magazine podcast coming up soon. Thank you, Beth Ann, for your time.
My privilege. Thank you for having me.
We'll see you next time here on the Good News Magazine podcast.